Now, because so much of Australia's business, trade and investment interests lie in the Asia-Pacific, common sense dictates that you would learn an Asian language, and Mandarin, the Chinese language, makes even greater sense. Indonesian as well, Japanese. So I would encourage students to look at a second language, particularly an Asian language, as part of their kit bag of skills and qualifications that they need to apply for an increasing number of jobs. That's what people are looking for in their graduates. And so there's a practical, personal, individual benefit from studying a second language. In terms of Australia-Chinese relations, as I said from the outset, I think it's important for our two countries to continue to enhance our relationship. There have been some difficulties in recent months, but I believe that over time the relationship between Australia and China will only grow as the level of trade and investment continues to grow, but also as China starts to take an even more significant role as part of the Asia-Pacific in terms of security and keeping our region stable and safe. And people will be looking to China to take that increasing role because of the size of the nation, its growing economy, its transformation to a market economy. And so China should be one of our most important strategic engagements and one of our most important bilateral relationships. I would hope that we would be able to conclude a free trade agreement with China. We commenced negotiations for a free trade agreement under the Howard government. I was actually in Beijing to meet with some of the trade negotiators in the services area, and that was back in 2006, and it seems that we haven't progressed very far, particularly not in the last 2 years, and currently with the rather frosty relations between the Australian government and the Chinese government, I'm not sure where our free trade agreement negotiations are currently situated. But to me that is an obvious and essential policy area that must be pursued, a free trade agreement with China. And from my own experience, I can say that if you're able to speak the language, you are going to have much more opportunities to develop that relationship with China over the long term. I think monolingualism will not serve the next generation of Australians well. It does imply an inflexibility. It implies a presumption that everybody will speak English. Well, the world doesn't all speak English, and I think that we would go a long way if we were able to adopt a second language, particularly an Asian language, in the years ahead. In terms of our specific foreign policy initiatives, we would obviously want to continue the strong bilateral relationships we had with the countries of significance to Australia's national interests, the United States, China, Japan, Indonesia and India. These are countries with whom we have strong and developing ties, and we would continue to do that in government. Now, I've spoken for about 25 minutes, and I would actually much rather hear from you as to what's on your mind and the sorts of issues that you have. Delighted to answer questions across a range of areas if that's what you would like to do, but I think it would be as beneficial for me to hear what's on your mind as for me to go on more about my commitment to the study of languages and our engagement with China. But again, I congratulate the ANU chapter of the Australia-China Youth Association for hosting this function this evening. Thank you. First question.
Julie, do you have any intentions of studying an Asian language yourself in the near future?
Well, you know, some of my colleagues in Parliament have actually done that. They have taken time to do a course and study languages. In fact, one of my dear colleagues from Western Australia, Judy Moylan, has been assiduously studying Mandarin ever since I've been in Parliament. It must be, well, I've been there 11 years and she's always had her book out in front of her. It's something I would love to do. I didn't actually have much of an ear for German when I studied it at school. In fact, I got through my fourth year, year 11, German, but that was a struggle. So I'm not perhaps naturally gifted in that regard. But I think it's the sort of thing I would do when I've got some time outside of politics. And that's not quite this year, but there will be a time when studying a language would be wonderful. I regret that I didn't have it as a lawyer, because during the 80s and 90s we increasingly spent time working with law firms in the Asia Pacific. In fact, my firm Clayton Newts was part of a network of law firms called the Pacific Rim Advisory Council, and we had firms in the Asia Pacific and also through the United States on the West Coast. And we met on a twice yearly basis. We exchanged ideas, we supported each other, we helped out with clients and work, and we had very strong relationships in the Asia Pacific. And it would have been greatly enhancing of the network had the Americans and the Australians been able to speak an Asian language, because of course all our Asian friends, our Asian lawyers, spoke English as a second language. So yeah, you're right, it's something that I should do, but I'm afraid maybe not this year. I won't go beyond what I'll do next year. Yeah.
I just wondered, thanks for coming, and I just wondered what the coalition's policy would be and how different it would be in terms of engaging China in terms of human rights, and how it would balance that with economic considerations, both in terms of foreign direct investment and also in terms of, I guess, picking up China in a bilateral forum.
I think one of the most significant achievements of the Howard government was to establish the Australia-China Human Rights Dialogue in 1997. That dialogue is the only dialogue China has with another country at ministerial level. It has human rights dialogues with other countries at an officials level, but this human rights dialogue is at a ministerial level, and that was set up by Minister Alexander Downer. Now, that dialogue, I believe, has been extremely successful in raising sensitive issues between Australia and China, but in a mutually respectful way. Under the framework of that dialogue, Tibetans have come to Australia to talk to Australian leaders. In fact, we had a group of 20 Tibetans come to Australia to talk about their concerns with human rights in China. That was enabled because it was done through this agreed dialogue. Had it not been done through the dialogue, I cannot imagine the circumstance where 20 Tibetans would have been sponsored by the Chinese government to come to Australia. Chinese officials have come to Australia to meet with our human rights commissioners under the framework of this dialogue. And we've raised issues including Tibet, Taiwan, but also women's rights, children's rights, ethnic minorities. We've raised a whole raft of very sensitive issues with China through that dialogue. And can I say, China have raised issues with us about our treatment of Indigenous Australians, about our treatment of Dr. Hanif. So they have also raised issues with Australia, and we have been able to raise issues with them. I don't think it is useful, in fact I think it is counterproductive, to seek to lecture other countries publicly without first raising the issues with them through a dialogue such as has been set up since 1997. So I would be working to enhance that dialogue. As I say, it's the only one China has at a ministerial level, and I think it's in danger of being sidelined at present, and I would certainly put it front and centre of our efforts.